Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. We are working on a series of tutorials on Quilting 101. The first one, we made 3 quilt tops out of a yard of fabric each. The second one, we learned how to tie a quilt and apply a self-binding where the binding wraps over from the back. And on this one, we're going to do machine quilting, but it's not going to be free motion. We're going to leave our presser foot on, and it's going to be straight line sewing, stitching the ditch, and that sort of thing. I went ahead and put my quilt sandwich together like we did on the last one. I also decided how I was going to quilt it ahead of time so I could go ahead and mark my lines that I want to stitch on, because I didn't want to mark it after I had all the layers in there. It's a little bit softer and a little bit harder to mark straight. So what I've decided to do is in the blue corners, I am going to, I have the luxury of having a pattern I can follow, so I don't have to draw lines on these. I'm going to stitch every other diagonal line on all 4 of those. On the peach ones, I'm going to do every other vertical line on each of them. Is that vertical? That's horizontal, I think. Whatever. This direction. Then in the center, I made a diamond pattern by connecting one corner to the other and making a big X. Then I went every 2 inches, which leaves a diamond pattern of about this wide. Now, if I were making a bag or a pot holder or something small, placemat, even a table runner, I would probably quilt it a little tighter, like every 1 inch. But on a blanket, on a quilt, I don't like it when they're quilted too close together because it makes the quilt stiff and not as soft. Some of them are gorgeously quilted, but they'll stand up by themselves and they have the texture of a cracker. So I like nice and soft quilts, so that's why I try to spread it out a little. Now when I made the quilt sandwich, I put the backing down first with the right side down. On this fabric it didn't matter, but most of them it does. So you put the pretty side, the right side down. Then I put a layer of batting, and I used my 505 adhesive spray to hold it in place. Then I put the top on it, and I once again used my adhesive spray. Please ignore the panting. That's our elderly golden retriever, and she wants to be underfoot all the time. So okay, for a lot of people that would be enough. I like to still baste mine. I don't use a whole lot of this. I use it sparingly, and I don't trust this or myself to not move the fabric. So we're going to go ahead and baste the quilt. Now some people baste only, some people use this only, and some like me like to do both. And the best way to baste one is just get a regular needle and regular thread, and you probably can't see this, but that's red thread. I get something that'll stand out so I can see it real good. The first thing I'm going to do is baste right down the center that way and right down the center this way. I tied a little knot in the end, but I'm not sure it's going to hold, so I think I'll just make a double stitch here. And I use long strings of thread because I'm too lazy to keep rethreading it. However, sometimes it gets me in trouble when I get a knot. Now, I'm going to take stitches that are 1 inch to 2 inches wide and apart. Now, for those of you that didn't see I'll sit down here so it's easier for me to do it at ground level, at same level. Those of you who didn't watch the last one, usually I take my quilts up to my church because they're usually bigger than this, and I use 2 or 3 6 or 8 foot tables, whatever I need, slide them close together. We have plenty of classrooms up there that have tables in it, and the church is perfectly fine with me doing that. You would want to ask permission before you did it, but I based mine up there because we taped down our background to hold it nice and straight. Now when I get to the end, I just double stitch it and cut it off because it doesn't have to hold for very long, just long enough for us to get it quilted. And I only use a single strand. I don't double strand it like we did when we tied the quilt, because in that instance it has to hold for a lifetime. In this, it only has to hold until we get the quilt quilted. So I'm going to start back here. And take a double stitch right there at the beginning. And then about every inch. And I'm sure I won't be perfectly straight. That doesn't even matter. Okay, I've got my first 2 lines stitched in, and I'd say about every 6 inches is probably a good distance. So I'll put another one right through here and right through here, and right through here and right through here, and then last ones along the edges. So meet me back here in a little bit and I'll have it all done. I've now got my quilt all basted. I don't know how well you can see. There's a line every 6 or 7 inches in both directions. I did 5 rows each direction. And now I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and we're going to start quilting. We are going to use a presser foot. I'm going to use a walking foot, even though I don't often use it. I know that they work better, so I'm going to try to get in the habit of using it more. But a walking foot regulates so that the fabric, so that the bottom and the top are both feeding through together, instead of one wanting to, like your top scrunching up and your bottom not, or vice versa. So it will make for a prettier seam. Now, you want to start in the middle when you can. And most of the time I do when I'm doing this kind of quilting. However, If I were doing free motion quilting, I find it easier to start in one corner and work my way down the quilt. The first thing I want to do is called stitching in the ditch, and that means literally stitching on top of the seams that you have. Now, because we have such big blocks, that's not going to be enough for this quilt. So that's why I've came up with the other patterns I'm going to quilt. So I'm going to first take it over to the machine and stitch all my seams. Then I'm going to start here in the middle and work on the diamond shape I have here. What I'll do is I'll stitch all the way down one row. Well, I'll start in a corner. I'll stitch all the way down a row, stitch on top of the ditch again, and go that direction. Stitch on top of the ditch, go this direction. Stitch on top of the ditch, this direction. So I'll be duplicating parts of about half of the stitching in the ditch. But that way I don't have to break my thread and we don't have a bunch of little threads sticking out everywhere. Okay, let's go to the machine and get started. I'm using a 3mm stitch length. We wanted a little bigger than what we pieced it with because it has to go through so many layers. And this is my walking foot, and there is a line right in the middle of it, and that's what I'm lining up on my seam. Okay, let's see if you can see. I did a pretty good job of staying in the ditch. There's a few places I barely got out of it, but that's to be expected. Okay, let's continue on. Now that our stitch in the ditch is done, I am going to stitch the center of this. I have my quilt all quilted, and now it's time to take out the basting thread and to work on the binding. So I am just going to pull out all these threads. That appears to be most of it. If I come across some more, I'll pull them out. And I also want to iron this center where I put all these marks to get rid of them. Okay, I think those are all gone. So now we just need to trim our quilt. A little spot there that just doesn't want to trim. Okay, I want to fold it over and let's see. That's pretty close to being the same width. It is the same width. Let's see about length. Yeah, that may be off about a ½ inch. Let me see if there's something that can be trimmed a little straighter here. And we'll see about the other side. No, that didn't really look it. Okay, let me measure it one more time. See where our seams are falling. I don't know if you can see this, but the problem appears to be right over here. It's about ¼ inch off by the time it gets to the end. So I'm going to straighten it just a little bit more. And call that good. Okay. The next thing we need to do is put our binding on it. And I have cut four strips for my binding. That is 2½ inches wide by the width of the fabric, so 44 inches or whatever, and then I cut off the selvages. Now, I want to put this together like this. And I'm going to draw, see where is the corner there? It's right there. So I'm going to draw from corner to corner. And sew that across there so that when we open it, we'll come back and trim off this excess. But when we open it, let me pin it over here. It will be one continuous line, and we will have distributed this extra bulk from the seam across here instead of having it all in one place. So that makes it easier and less bulky when you bind the quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all of those and take them over to the machine and stitch. There'll be 3 seams. Okay, let me go sew these 3 seams, and then we'll be ready to put our binding on and finish this quilt up. Okay, we're going to trim off the excess, about 1/4 inch. See how that opens up and it makes a nice straight piece of binding. And we cut off the excess, and we're going to iron this open again to decrease the bulk. Lay a ironing pad up here. Now we're going to turn our quilt over to the back side. This is just one way of doing binding. This is doing binding on the machine. Tomorrow I'll show you how we do it and put the final seam by hand. I'm going to take this binding and fold it in half lengthwise, and I'm going to start somewhere in the middle of the long side, and I'm going to pin it so I can show you exactly what I'm doing, but I usually like to not pin it and just kind of hold it as I go, because one or the other tends to grow on me after I've pinned it if I didn't get it exact. Okay, I'm going to leave a tail, and I'll show you that when we get to the very end, what it's for. Now, when we get to the very end, to a corner, I'm going to stop sewing 1/4 inch away. Make sure this is all in your line of sight. So I'm going to stop sewing right about there. It's about 1/4 inch from this side. Then when I stop, I'm going to back off of it. Then I'm going to fold this at a 45-degree angle. I'll probably go in and iron this binding in half before I actually start sewing it on. So we fold it 45 degrees. Then I'm going to turn it back. That's why it's best to have that folded, so that this lines right up with your edge. And then I'm going to start 1/4 inch in and 1/4 inch then on both sides, about right there, and I'm going to take off again. I'll go ahead and pin at least part of this so you're able to follow me. The one bent pin in the pin cushion again. I'm going to throw it away so I don't pull it out again, but another one will pop up. Now you can see we have a seam here, and it's getting distributed across all the way from there over to here, because on the back side, that's where it comes. So that cuts out a lot of the bulk. If it was all straight right here, we'd have a real bulky seam when we tried to turn it. And because we are sewing on the straight of grain, just making a straight seam, and we're not going around any curves, we don't need our binding cut on the bias. If we were going around a curve of any sort, like say you were making a bag or even clothing around a neckline or something, you would want, see, I told you there'd be another bent pin. You would want to cut your binding on a bias, because the bias stretches and it'll go real smoothly around that curve. But since all our sewing is straight, that's not necessary. And cutting on the bias actually kind of, I wouldn't say it wastes fabric, but it uses a lot more fabric, cuts it across your fabric, and then you kind of, the little tails that are left are hard to use. Okay, here's the edge right here of my quilt. I'm going to go back about a 1/4 inch. That's where I'm going to stop sewing, and I'll just back right off. Then I'm going to fold this at a 45-degree angle. Let me make sure I've got it folded here right. That's why I should have ironed that down first. Then when I start sewing again, I'm going to come in a 1/4 of an inch from there and a 1/4 of an inch from there. I'll just go ahead and pin this all. It's not going to hurt. And if I want to adjust it as I go, I'll take the pins out as I go. And we're coming up on another diagonal seam. going to stop about 1/4 of an inch in and back off. Then I'll fold this at a 45-degree angle and back again so that this is parallel with where we were sewing before, and this is parallel with where we're going. And I'll start sewing 1/4 of an inch in from both sides. Okay, here's our last corner. We're going to stop 1/4 of an inch in, back off. We're going to turn this at a 45-degree angle on that corner. Make sure I've got it folded. Okay. Then I'm going to fold it back on top of itself so that this fold is parallel here and these two raw edges are parallel over here. And I'll start 1/4 of an inch in from both corners and take off again. Now, when I get about the same distance away as I started sewing, so these pieces are similar in length, I am going to fold this like this, and then fold this like this. I might want to open that up a little bit more so I can lay it smoother. Sorry, the camera shut off, but I got it fixed. We have these two meeting up like this, and when I get to that point, I will cut off all but 1/4 inch on each of these and then seam them together, and we will have another angular seam just like all the others around here, and you won't be able to tell where this started or stopped. So now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew all the way around it with 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm going to go back and finish my seam now that the two ends are joined. Now that my binding is sewn all the way around, I'm going to give this a good iron. So I can press in that seam really, really good. Not seam, fold. Okay, maybe you can see the quilting pattern too better on the back than you could on the front. Still got a few strings here. But these 4 panels are all just going horizontal. These are going at an angle on the ends. And in the middle, we have a diamond pattern. Okay, I'm going to flip it over to the front side. And I'm going, another string. I'm going to turn this over and pin it in place. So that this binding is all about an even distance all the way around. Now some people only use 2 inches for their binding because they just want a very tiny piece of it sticking up on top. So you can do that if you'd rather. I like to allow a little extra just in case I took a seam a little bigger than I should have or something like that. Now when we get to our corners, more strings. We're going to pull this way. And then fold it over so that you have a nice mitered corner. I think this is the corner I accidentally back stitched a little more than I should have. So it may not want to lay quite as good. Let's try the next corner and see if it works a little better. Sorry, I'm in a very confined space here and I'm just knocking things over right and left. I added some more lights and that's complicating things, so. Okay. Some basting thread there. Now, you just pull this straight until it kind of miters itself there. Goes at a 45-degree angle. Then you fold this over in another string. And you have a perfect mitered corner. The points should meet there. So let's try one more. All right, let's see if I can do this without knocking the camera. Nope, I can't. Okay, we want to keep folding this all the way down until we have our 45-degree fold right there. Let me put a couple pins in. And then we turn it back up so that the two corners meet. Okay, I'm going to finish pinning this, and then I'll meet you over at the sewing machine, and we are going to stitch right next to the edge on the top side. All right, here is our completed quilt with nice quilting on it, ready to be given to a baby or an elderly person for a lap quilt. Here was the one we tied. And we have one more to go, and that one will be free motion quilting. Now the whole purpose of these videos is to show you that you can quilt your own quilts. Long arm quilting, hiring a long arm person to quilt for you can get really expensive. And like for instance, a sampler quilt I made, I think it's going to cost me like $180 to have it quilted. And I can't afford to do that real often. So it's nice to know that there are other ways that we can accomplish the same end. And I think this quilting job looks really nice. I think it shows up much better on the back, but I'm real pleased with it. Now tomorrow we're going to attempt our free motion quilting. And I say attempt because that's not my strongest suit. But I'm going to give you a hint. I'm going to cheat a little and show you cheater's way to do free motion quilting. So I say tomorrow when the next video comes out. So if you will join me next time, that will be the end of our series and the last method of quilting and doing binding. I want to remind you that when you want to top stitch your binding, do it all on machine like I did here. You want to sew it on the back first and wrap it around to the front. Otherwise, if you sewed it on front and wrapped around to the back and you stitched it, it could be uneven on the top, your stitching. So it's just best that your stitching show on the back. Mine happens to run right along. I don't know if you can see this, but it's just right along the edge. So it wouldn't have shown too bad either way, but you never know. So that's why we sew from the back, wrap around to the front. Tomorrow we're going to sew from the front, wrap around to the back, and hand stitch it in place. Okay, if you would, please like, subscribe, share, comment, whatever you can do. It helps me to bring more videos to you, and I have some exciting things planned for the future. Remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord. And I'll see you next time.